Everyone, just thought I'd take this opportunity to give the table a brief update on where the team are at with the development of the water strategy and the associated communication and engagement plan. So this work is progressing very well across our comms and engagement and our water team, and we hope to be able to bring that to council at the next council meeting. We'd also plan to perhaps have a seminar to introduce the components of that plan prior to that meeting. In the interim, we'll also look to produce a roadmap on the overall program, what's been achieved to date, and what we are hoping to achieve at certain milestones throughout the next 12 to 18 months. So that will be circulated prior to any seminar or formal meeting. So I just thought I'd give you that update to let you know that work is progressing well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would just call on any minor matters not on the agenda. Does anyone have anything that, no? Very good, thank you. And confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Thursday the 30th of January. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bogue. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Brosnan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Excellent. We'll move on to our agenda items, and our first item today is the local governance statement. So we'll call on Debbie to come in. Are you going to stay there? Yeah, you happy to stay there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Can everybody hear me here? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Right. So the local governance statement is the last for the moment of the mandatory documents that are required post-election. And it's actually a fantastic opportunity to provide high-level information to the public in one place about the activities and functions of council. So it's probably one of the lesser known but really key ways that the public can find out a little bit more about what council does, who we are at any given time, and our structures that we have in place. You'll see in the report that it's very strongly guided by the Local Government Act. It's very clear as to what has to be included in there. And so essentially we've brought it through to council so that you can confirm for yourselves that we are providing to the public in the time frame that we need to the information that we are required to. And I'm specifying that that's why we bring it through to council, because it is a live document. So you're confirming essentially that at this point in time we're covering the information that we need to, because there are likely to be changes this afternoon, let alone tomorrow. So it's a very, this is a very iterative document. We will, there are some tweaks to the terms of reference. We have our first Māori committee hui tomorrow, at which point we're anticipating that there'll be some discussion around the chairpersonship for that committee, so that will then get rolled into this document. So you can see there are a number of ways that new information might be iteratively updated at any given time, and we'll make sure that it's as current as possible, so we do keep it living, as it were. So I think unless there are any further questions, I did want to note, thank you Maxine, and others may have picked up, we're not sure why, but the updates to the terms of reference to the Napier People and Places Committee doesn't seem to have rolled through into this version of the governance structure. So we will be updating and correcting that. Thank you for picking that up. And there are a couple of other, I beg your pardon, if I can just draw your attention to a couple of external appointments that you will be approving as part of this process, which have come through following the external appointments process that you went through at the end of last year. So we've unpicked what happened with the Hawke's Bay Sports Council and Sport Hawke's Bay, so that's now been corrected. Thank you. We do have an additional appointment that's being proposed to the Howard Estate Advisory Board. That is an external appointment of an external person. She's actually the incumbent. The advisory board appointee is a joint appointment between ourselves, Hastings, and the Chamber of Commerce. Hastings and I believe the Chamber of Commerce have already ratified that they're comfortable, and the board themselves are really happy with Michelle's contribution over her term so far. The Puki Moki Moki Marae Trust appointment hadn't been made at the end of last year, so the proposal is that Councillor Brown step into that role. And there's been a further additional appointment that was added or that we became aware of at the beginning of this calendar year to Te Matua Maui Trust, and it's proposed that former Mayor Barbara Arnott step into that role.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Do we have any questions of Debbie?
Just a slight amendment, Debbie. I think the management structure on page 39 also may need amendment to obviously our top role being vacant now. Thank you.
So you, Madam Chair, just to follow up on that, are we going to go through that document? Because there's a number of items that need to be amended through the structured document report.
Through the structure?
Yeah.
Would you like to go through that document now, or because, like as Devora said, this is very much a live document. I just think, as opposed to making all those amendments right here and now within this environment, perhaps we could feed back to Devora for her to update with the current changes she's already aware of.
Okay, so further back to these recommendations here, do we actually see the trust deeds or the terms of reference for these appointees?
They are all held on file.
They are now, yes. So very welcome to request, and we can pull those out for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So with those two particular appointments, they actually only came to our attention quite recently. So there's been a bit of tidying up there with regards to getting that. Yeah. Councillor Price.
I on the management structure chart, where does Charles sit on that? He's not in there? I was just wondering because he's...
Whether
You
he's
said-
part of the
Yeah.
senior leadership team?
We can come back to you on that one.
Okay. Councillor Bowen.
Just a question about the portfolios. Has there been any development of, we looked at a sort of a generic terms of reference for portfolio
Job description.
holders, job description or whatever. I wondered how that was progressing.
So that job description is currently still in a draft form, and we'll be looking to formalise that in the not too distant future.
Right. So with just carrying on with the number of amendments that are to be made, should we put something in the actual recommendation that subject to future amendments, or is that a given because this is not set in concrete? Just your advice.
Through you, Madam Chair, in Part A we have specified that you're noting the current version, recognising that it is a live document. I'm very happy to make an amendment if you want to very clearly specify that there will be some further amendments out of the decisions that have been made over the last week. From our perspective, I believe that probably covers enough, but very happy to be guided if you want further specificity there. That's no problem at all.
Just for sake of clarity, maybe it might be for people who look at this and aren't aware that it can be changed at any stage. Not quite sure of the wording.
Perhaps we could add, through you, Madam Mayor. Perhaps we could add a short note into the end of Part A there. So we have note the current version of the local governance statement, recognising that it is a live document which will be maintained over the triennium, and recent amendments will be made, well, they actually have to be made this afternoon, so that there will be a number of amendments made on the 12th of March.
Can I just suggest make it a bit more general than that? So it is a live document which will be maintained over the triennium and amended where appropriate.
Sure.
because we don't want to be tied in just to changes that have been made over the last week, if that's appropriate.
Very happy with
Yeah.
that. Thank you, Councillor Bogue.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Oh, yeah. Who would like to, I'll put the motion and move the motion. Thank you, Councillor Crystal. Seconded by Councillor Bogue. Thank you. Would you like to talk to the paper, Councillor Crystal?
No, I think it's all pretty
No?
obvious.
Councillor Bogue?
No, just that it's a very comprehensive document. It's great to have it all there. Thank you for all the work that's been done putting it together, and, you know, look forward to seeing this as, you know, a significant description of who we are and what we're doing. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak briefly to page 14. I'd just like to draw councillors' attention. I think we had discussed in a previous meeting having a list of all council's bylaws, when they were made, when they are due for review, and just wanted to draw councillors' attention if they had read past that provides quite a good summary of where we're at with those. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of corrections or updates that are needed in that list as well.
Feel free. And just providing some clarity there around any significant changes that are made to this document will come back to council for adoption, as opposed to just going through the update process.
So through you, Madam Chair, whether it's correct process or not, but I've got a list of items here, so would you like me just to simply forward that list to governance to have a look at any adjustments, or?
Are there any of significance that you think need to be brought to councillors' attention?
Well, mainly it's just around some of the changes in appointments. There's a couple of appointments there that are no longer in place. There's some issues around some of the bylaws, around date timings. There's some questions around, or some matters around the governance structure around specialist committees. But again, it's just really around the document is not up to date, as opposed to you know. Yeah. So how do you want to
And I
address
think
those?
a number of those items you've mentioned actually sit within other documents that have already been adopted, and which have been pulled through into this, so it would be making sure they're aligned. I'm wondering if it's something similar to what's happened with the
Potentially, that depends on what the updates are.
Well, it's, for instance, the liquor licensing commissioner has changed, whereas on page
Yes, so we had the
34,
through the mayor, we had the opportunity to pull that, and that should be correct in the terms of reference, but it won't be correct in the image. We haven't had a chance to update that. Yep. We do recognise that.
And then there's a
thank you.
couple of typos in there. We're looking after coats between Clifton and Tangoio. So they sorts
It's
of-
my
I'm happy
fashion
to-
bent coming through, Councillor Simpson. Apologies.
I'm quite happy just to
I
provide
think
them a
if
list.
you forward through to staff the changes you've identified, and then if we do, it's a live document, if we do need to bring it back to our next meeting, we can do that.
And another area that I think is currently missing from the governance structure we've discussed is the sister cities arrangement. It's not mentioned anywhere in the document. Both Councillor Crone and I have offered to contribute to that space. I wonder whether it should be elevated back into prominence.
We'll make a note of that to look at pulling that through. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
I just wanted to make a comment around it. It is such a great document that covers off a lot of what we do, and I wondered, I suppose it's not particularly digestible because it is a large document, but I wondered if there's a way that we could celebrate the document and get it out into the public more. It's a bit of a balance.
We are obligated to make it publicly available, so we do that via our website and having hard copies available at our three primary customer-facing centres, so the Customer Service Centre and the libraries, but there may be other ways that you wish to draw it to the public's attention, if that's so.
We could include a reference in the next Proudly Napier to it as well, and
Sure, okay.
yeah.
Great, we'll work with the communications and marketing team on something to go into that.
Even just a shout out to the document on social media or something to highlight
on
its
the
existence.
Facebook page, and I
Yeah.
guess individually as governors on our Facebook pages, we could also shout out and steer people in the direction of finding it. Provide the link to the website.
Great.
Can I just, I know I've already spoken, etc., but one thing that struck me when I read it, when I looked through the different, hang on a minute, I'll just find where it is, the laws, the national legislation, some of the national legislation that's referred to that we are in keeping with were things like the Napier Borough Endowments Act of 1876, the Napier Public Baths Act of 1908, and these quite old pieces of legislation. I assume they're still relevant and they haven't been updated, but it seems to be quite archaic to have something from 150 years ago as one of the governing documents that we have to adhere to. It was entertaining, if not.
We have confirmed via the online legislative portal all of the national level legislation that's applicable to Napier specifically, and which is wide enough that it may impact on Napier City Council's activities. So we, of the list of legislation affecting Napier, we have taken the liberty of removing things that are very specific to other organisations. There are some trust-based things, for example, that clearly are outside of Council's remit. But otherwise, regardless of age, we have included it for fullness.
Thank you.
There being no further debate, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Our next agenda item is the Hawke's Bay Museums Trust Statement of Intent and Financial Reporting. Darren, if you wanted to speak to that.
Through the Mayor. So we receive a copy of in the report is a copy of the 6 month to the end of December from the Museum Trust, and as well they've provided their statement of intent for the following year. So Chris is here and obviously has a deeper understanding of the financials, but the requirement under legislation is for the Hawke's Bay Museum Trust to provide the statement of intent for Council's feedback, and they've got a set period to do that, so we've got about the next month to undertake that review and for any feedback which can be incorporated either today or going back to the Museum Trust for incorporation. It really needs to be adopted by Council if there's any further comment required after today. But I can pass over to Chris for further comment around the financials.
Thank you. The councillors have any questions of Chris? It all looked quite straightforward to me. There was nothing that stuck out as being out of line. No? Councillor Wright.
Not so much, but just if you look at Richard Grant's letter from the Chairman, it does explain that we haven't made any major adjustments due to the fact of the ongoing work of the Hawke's Bay Museums Joint Working Trust, so they're kind of working together, and there's a lot of work happening in that space, so it's more of a steady the ship sort of statement of intent, just carrying on while the other work is going on over here.
Thank you for that update. Deputy Mayor.
Chris, is there anything you think we need to note in those financial reports? Similar to the Mayor, nothing stuck out to me, but I don't have the accountancy brain necessarily.
It's an interesting set of accounts in that the number of lines in these reports are actually far more than the number of transactions that go through the trust. It makes it look more complicated than it is. But no, it's very much a steady as it goes report.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have a mover for the, thank you, Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Crown. Would you like to speak to the paper at all, Councillor Wright?
No, it is very straightforward, and it's just we're sort of in a bit of a holding pattern while the work goes on with that Hawke's Bay Joint Museums Working Trust. So, and hopefully we'll have some good recommendations coming out from that group to you in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Crown? No? There being no further debate or discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Moving on to the joint committee meetings for the Omarunui Refuse Landfill and Clifton to Tangoio Coastal Hazards Strategy. I would like to take a moment to congratulate, although he is absent today, Councillor Tapani on his appointment as the Deputy Chair of the Omarunui Refuse Landfill Committee. And I'm just trying to think, did we have an appointment on the Clifton to Tangoio Coast Hazard Strategy? Did we? Was it yourself,
And the Deputy Mayors of Hastings and Napier.
Were those? So congratulations on those appointments. Did we have anyone talking to those papers at all, or would the committee members like to give us any sort of update on those meetings? No?
I'm happy just to give a brief update on the coastal hazard work. So returning councillors will be aware, and possibly new councillors as well, that the working group for coastal hazards got to a decision point where it stopped last term, being around the contribution to a contributory fund from the relevant councils. So we've asked for a workshop with all three councils to hopefully update you all on the work that's been done so far, and pave the way for hopefully some resolution of how we'll manage that contributory fund this term. That was scheduled, I think, for last week, but with the passing of Sandra's mother, that's been pushed out, so we're working on a new date now, and there'll also be an update paper on the coastal hazards coming to my next committee in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you. Councillor Bowes.
Just a question. I appreciate that these the minutes of the Omarunui Refuse Landfill Joint Committee are not ours to tamper with in any way, but there was something that jumped out at me on page 121 when it says halfway down election of Deputy Chair, Councillor Tapine was nominated as Chair by Councillor Redstone and seconded by Councillor McGrath. I think they've omitted the word Deputy Chair there because the Chair is obviously Councillor Redstone, so perhaps when you do confirm those minutes you might point that out.
Feed that back. Thank you, Councillor Bogue. If there's no further questions, I'll ask for someone to move that agenda item. Thank you, Councillor McGrath and Deputy Mayor Brosnan. Would either of you wish to make any further comments?
Oh, just through the chair, I'm new to the committee out there, but one thing I would just like to say is there's a cost to producing rubbish for a city, and the cost tends to go up, not down. So just think about what you purchase and how you dispose of it.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor McGrath. There being no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 4, we have actions from previous meetings. As opposed to going through each item individually, I'll just open the floor to anyone who, if you have any specific questions. Yes, Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
I had two items that I was wondering if we could see where they're at with their response. The first is the time frame for the dechlorinated station, water station, and the second is the refurb cost of the civic building was going to be circulated as well. If we wouldn't mind an update on both of those. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, with regard to the question relating to the dechlorination station, the projected timeframe for that is the end of June this year. We're working through some of the consenting matters and so on and so forth, but that is the timeframe.
Have you landed on a preferred site?
The site that has been identified is immediately north of the aquarium.
Thank you.
It saves some of the logistics around parking and other work that we had to put in place for the initial station. Yep.
Very central.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And through the Mayor, just in relation to your question in the costs of the civic building, so there's a working party, as you're aware, being established for the future work and the thinking around that particular master project. There's a paper also being developed at the moment with information that will be provided back to Council, and some of that information will be included in that future paper.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bogue.
Just a question through you, Madam Mayor, about the last item, Prosperous Napier, the officers to refine the policy. It doesn't say what policy. I'm just wondering if I could find out what policy they're refining, because I can't remember that item.
That's the council organisation remuneration policy that's being brought back through today. The refinements have been made, and I think it was updated to the hub separately as a document. So apologies for the lack of clarity in the actions, but it should be sorted today as long as you're happy with the updates.
Yeah.
Do I have a mover for actions? Thank you, Councillor. Was that a hand up, Councillor Taylor? It was, yes. Seconded by Councillor Bogue. Has everyone gone to sleep? I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So we'll now move on to the reports and recommendations from the standing committees. First up, we have the reports from the Sustainable Napier Committee held on the 13th of February 2020, being the National Aquarium detailed business case. Now, there has been some further conversation that we would like to have around this particular item, so I'll open the floor to discussion. Councillor Bogue, did you wish to say anything further?
I guess my concern that I have expressed to other councillors is that when we said on item E there, the substitute motion confirms it will not further the project as set out in the detailed business case without government capital support of a minimum of $35 million. It seems to me that that's really setting the bar extremely high, and it may mean that doors that might have been opened, should that the wording have been perhaps up to $35 million, doors that might have been opened with central government may not be open with the magnitude of that amount that we're asking for. So I guess I just wanted to see if people are comfortable with that. The ramifications we don't know as yet, but it could be that this doesn't go very far with central government when we're asking for a minimum of that amount of money. So I just wanted to know, are people comfortable with that? And if so, we go ahead with that.
So are you foreshadowing a potential amendment to the resolution should it be supported by the...
I'd rather have the discussion first
no,
and
I'm
see
going to
how
suggest
people
we just
feel.
have a discussion first, but just highlighting that this could potentially be an amendment to the resolution as it stands. Yeah.
Perhaps a highlight, the motion might be of, I don't know if you want to put a figure on it or up to 35.
I think we'll have a discussion first and then use. So Councillor Wright, yeah.
I'm very comfortable with the resolution that we got to because of the overall cost of the project. I felt that we clearly understood without that level of government support that the project would not fly. And I guess the reason for that is because of if we don't get that from the government, I don't believe it indicates that they support the facility as a national aquarium and a national site of significance. And I don't think the public would find the ongoing project palatable without that level of support. So I'm very comfortable with our current recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable with it because I like Councillor Wright. With a minimum, it doesn't actually stipulate where that central government funding would come from. There may be a number of organisations which could contribute, but with the overall cost, there's still a balance that could be raised from other than central government agencies. So, I mean, like Councillor Wright, if the government's not prepared to put their hand up to that level, then it's not going to attract the contributions from other non-central government agencies. And we've made a commitment of what our total amount is, and subject to the other support from central or non-central government agencies, it won't fly. So I'm quite comfortable where it sits at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Simpson.
Through you, Madam Chair, while I appreciate what Councillor Wright and Councillor Taylor have just said, I think the risk with such a definitive recommendation is it actually caveats any possibility for people to come back with a variation or another option as to how the funding can be achieved. We've set it very high. We've already determined that our contribution is capped, so therefore they're not coming to look to us for more money. But I think we need to be very careful that we don't limit the people who will go and attract funding to the fact that if they haven't achieved that 35 million from government, it's over. I think we need to be able to provide them the flexibility to come back and say, well, actually, there's another funding model that we can offer up that still achieves the financial expectations through the business case, but it may not be specifically 35 million from central government.
Deputy Mayor Brodlin.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that's been said, and I think the intention around bullet point E, when we included that in bullet point 3, in E, that the conversation with government be brought back to council along with recommendations on the next step, was really trying to foreshadow a situation that Councillor Simpson describes. So if it would provide clarity to the resolution, I would be happy to foreshadow an amendment that we remove that bullet point 3 and make that a new F, and it reads something along the lines of: note, should the matters in E not be met, conversations with government will be reported back, along with a decision gateway for council on next steps, or something along those lines, which was the intention of that bullet point E. I'm not sure how that sits with council, but that is up for discussion if it would give it more clarity.
We see it up there.
Sorry, could we just have that paraphrased again for the minute-taking purposes?
Yeah, not a problem. So just for discussion purposes, not being moved. So it would be the removal of bullet point 3 under E, and it would be replaced with a new F.
Are you comfortable if I put the wording down the bottom just for the moment?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
There's a
So
bit
it's
of a delay
That's
with the system.
fine. Note, should the matters in E not be met, conversations with government will be reported back to council as a decision gateway on next steps. To be workshopped, just noted that down, but around, I suppose the purpose of that is giving clarity to the fact that if E is not met, then we have a decision gateway.
Just on that, through you, Madam Mayor, surely the resolution as it now stands confirms it will not further the project, that's a gateway, as set out in the detailed business case without government capital support of a minimum of 35 million. Doesn't that cover the issue of us having a gateway? That is the gateway. So I don't think we need another amendment.
It was all about providing clarity. If council believes that clarity already exists in the original motion, I'm quite comfortable with that, but it was just picking up on the debate of others.
I think that does provide further clarity, just to ensure that the nervousness around the potential restrictive nature of point E can be covered off by that update.
Okay. So that's saying, through you, Madam Mayor, that if we move and second and carry this today, there's still another gateway at a later time to be reported back to us? Sorry, just a bit of clarity there.
It's providing an opportunity to actually come back to council and look at this if that $35 million threshold is not met. That's your intention, isn't it, Deputy Mayor Brosnan?
Absolutely. So I think council's being, if I can speak to it, I think council's being quite clear in that, as detailed in the business case, we require $35 million of government funding, aka 50% of the proposed project's capital budget, plus obviously the operational commitment, before we're prepared to proceed with the business case. If that doesn't happen, then council needs to make a decision on what its next steps are. As Councillor Simpson outlined, that may be another viable funding option. There may be, the team may find some alternative investment to a level that's suitable to council, but this gives them the opportunity to bring that back to us and make a decision. We may decide that the risk in that, for instance, is too much, but at least it's in front of us for a decision. Yeah.
Madam Mayor, could I ask the governance to explain, does that not contradict the actual E, which says that we won't proceed without this, and then it's saying, well, if we don't get that, then we can come back again? Does the amendment contradict the motion as it now stands?
I don't believe it does, because I think it does simply provide us with another opportunity to actually decide on the next steps, whether that might be that we simply do not proceed at all, or whether there's other opportunities within the detailed business case that could be relooked at, or whether there's opportunities to engage with other stakeholders. Councillor Wright, if you wanted to.
I don't think it does either, because we were always, if the government doesn't come up with the minimum 35 million, we were always going to have to come around the table and have another talk about that regardless.
Exactly.
So it really is just confirming that.
Yeah.
It's for clarity.
And certainly, from my perspective, it has always been vitally important that we receive the appropriate level of both financial CapEx and OpEx support from central government to move forward with this project. We absolutely need that recognition that it's a project of national significance, and I think that's vital in terms of approaching other key stakeholders and seeking their support for this as well. So Deputy Mayor Brosnan, would you like to put forward that amended?
Yeah,
You're wanting to move that?
I'm happy to move with the amendment of bullet point 3 under E being removed and replaced with what's noted on the board. Move that for discussion.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Did you wish to speak to that first, Deputy Mayor Brosnan?
Yeah, happy to speak to that. So similar to the discussion we've already had, I think this resolution sets us up for success, really. It sends a really clear message to government that we require them to be an ongoing and a significant contributor to this project. And in fact, council will not be interested in proceeding should central government choose not to invest in their national aquarium. That being said, I think it would be prudent for us to, having considered the work that's already been done, have another discussion if central government, and I hope they do not, decide not to invest to the level outlined in the detailed business case. I believe this sets us up for success. I believe this sets some really clear minimum standards, and in fact we're following the framework set out in the detailed business case, and lets staff and our funding, whatever the funding body call themselves, to go off with a really clear mandate from council, and actually a really clear consequence of not funding, which I think is always important as a motivator, that without your involvement, government, and without your involvement, key stakeholders, this project will not proceed. It can't always sit on the back of ratepayers, and we require a real commitment from other parties in this. So yeah, happy to speak in support of the amended resolution in that space.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, would you like to speak now or save your... Save, thank you. Councillor Bogue.
Could I just ask that instead of government we say central government, because there are other governments here in the area. Just to clarify, we've talked about central government, we know it's central government, could we just put that in, please? If that's...
Quite happy with that amendment.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh,
Oh, that's fun.
it's like the Russian government.
We've been hacked.
100% sure what that's doing. We'll make a note off screen. Thank you.
Off screen. Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Bogue. Did anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Simpson, would you like to? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think the amendment is appropriate. I think it is important that we provide opportunity for these sorts of matters to seek success rather than have them kneecapped as in the previous motion. It's important for our community and our economic strength going forward that we maintain or make every effort to maintain these sorts of features and facilities in our environment to attract both domestic and international tourism, educational opportunities, and to ensure that we have robust employment opportunities within our community. So I think it's really important that we provide some lenience around how we achieve the goal, but if the goal is not achievable, then we need to be sensible about it at the next step.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Boston, would you like your right of reply? Or your...
No, happy to reserve.
In case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Moving on to the
That's
report.
the amendment?
That's the substitute motion, yeah.
So we're still... Yeah.
Moving on to the reports from Napier People and Places Committee held on the 27th of February 2020. Now, if everybody's happy for me to move through these so that we can adopt them as a group, if there is anything that you would like to debate separately, please just let me know. The first paper was the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Annual Report of 2018-19. Second was the Napier Positive Ageing Strategy. Third, the Safer Napier Program Annual Update. Fourth, the Napier Social Monitor Report 2019. And lastly, the Lease of Reserve Hawke's Bay Volunteer Coastguard Charitable Trust. If there's no discussion of any of those papers, could I ask for a mover? Thank you, Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Bogue. Did either of you wish to comment on any of the note? Perfect. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Next up, we have the reports from Prosperous Napier Committee held 27th of February 2020. Now, I will take the first paper separately, the reserve funding changes. The reason being I did vote against this paper in the original debate and am intending to vote against it with this one as well. Did anyone wish to speak or ask any questions on this paper before we... Councillor Brown.
I would just like you to expand on the reasons why you're not, just to get a picture of your thinking.
Mm-hmm. So as I stated at the Prosperous Napier Committee meeting, I'm taking quite a conservative approach on this. I did have some concerns that we were transferring funds between reserves without, for example, an underlying document around the Tiawa structure plan not being completed. So I was taking quite a conservative approach in terms of, for me, I didn't have the level of comfort that I would have liked to transfer those funds from a financial contribution reserve, which has quite a specific purpose, to a urban suburban reserve, which there's a lot more discretion in terms of what those funds can be used for.
So the concern is that the Tiawa development might not get the funding?
Just the concern, yeah, that there had some planning that I would have liked to see presented before that transfer was done hadn't been completed. So, yeah. Okay.
Can we ask the head of our infrastructure directorate to make comment on what the risk is to council in moving those funds if the structural plan for Tiawa comes in at a cost greater than they've left in those financial reserves, therefore potentially leaving it under budget?
We can. We did have a commentary on that at the original meeting, but it would be good to have a recap on that.
I
Yes.
think so, thank you.
No, I've stepped out of the room. Oh, John, happy to talk to
that. Through you, Madam Chair, with regard to the Tiawa structure plan, that was completed some time ago. but we do have an intention to review that document in terms of the order of development within it and perhaps the cost makeup of assets required to be constructed by developers and by council to service that area, and what is a reasonable cost sharing arrangement within that. With regard to the specific question asked by Councillor Brosnan, I would have to take that away and work that up. That requires a bit more of a detailed answer than what I'm able to give you off the top of my head today.
Just a follow-up question, John. The review that you're noting that's proposed, do you envision that review requiring, in council's view, if all of the points that we wish to change through that review in terms of its rollout of specific infrastructure, will that see us require more or less money for the scheme?
That is a good question, through you, Madam Chair. Part of that review requires our stormwater model to be able to tell us whether the current structure plan has a surplus of assets in it or not. So with that, I specifically refer to our cross-country drum pump station and whether there's capacity within that asset to meet the requirements of stormwater conveyance and disposal, and not require another stormwater pump station to be created at the pond within Te Awa. That pond has a significant value, not the pond, that structure plan identifies the need for another pump station of equivalent size to the cross-country drying pump station at many millions of dollars. So there is a potential that through that work we'll identify less assets and less cost associated with it. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Thank you. Can I continue asking just a question? Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is to Adele, so I may need some time. Thank you very much. Adele, is there a risk if we move money out of this fund into the proposed fund that should the review being undertaken by John's team require as much money as we currently have in that reserve for Te Awa, what is the risk of having that money not sitting there in this fund? Is it easily transferred back as required? What's the process?
Through the Mayor, so with regards to the reasons why we actually transferred that money was the financial and development contributions is set out in our policy, and so our policy requires us to charge the developers for certain aspects of a development. So the way that fund is actually reconciled is we identify what projects are going to be seeking development of financial contributions throughout a period, and then we track that money that's received and the payments going out against those developers. And so we have to be accountable for the monies in and the monies out as set out in our policy. Now the contributions by council is in our mind, a separate contribution, and that money has been sitting inside an account where it says that the purpose of that reserve was to track and monitor the developers' funds. So what we've identified is the moving of those funds to the Suburban and Urban Growth Fund still means they can contribute that money to developments, but also if there's other discretionary items that meet the criteria for Suburban and Urban Growth Fund, they can also allocate those funds. Now, in the annual plan, all the decisions around the use of those funds come back to council. So the risk will be if council as a whole determine to use those funds in any other manner, but they do have that discretion and can still continue to contribute for these types of projects, as John's identified. So,
sorry if you don't mind, I continue asking some questions. Would it not be appropriate that any funds council has flagged as needing as its contribution to, say, the Te Awa funds, council's component of that be put in a separate account that couldn't be used for council as discretionary funding but is flagged for the development as it was set aside for?
Through the Mayor, that is able to be discussed by council, and yes, we can set up separate reserves with special purposes.
But that's not what you're proposing in this paper?
What we'd proposed was to bring the funding out so that we've separately identified, as per the requirements around that fund, for the financial and development contributions to be separately identified. We've got it going into the Suburban and Urban Growth Fund. Council can then move it from that particular fund into a separate fund if it desires.
Could we not move it directly from this fund into a tagged fund for the purpose it was originally set aside?
No, through the Mayor. So that fund initially wasn't specifically identified for Te Awa either. So it was just funding coming in as a contribution to development across the city. It wasn't separately identified for Te Awa.
So can I suggest that obviously any allocations out of the suburban urban fund must come back to council decisions anyway, and if there is any desire for those funds to be tagged into a reserve with more specific purposes, we could actually bring that back to council as well and do that transfer at a future date.
Yeah, I think that would be really prudent, especially to line that up with the review that John's referring to, so we know what our budget allocations should look like for specific developments and set that money aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So we could actually make a slight amendment to the recommendation within this paper that pending the result of the review to be undertaken with regards to Te Awa structure plan, that funds sitting within this reserve could be earmarked to be allocated.
Appropriately.
Yes. The wording of that wasn't good, sorry.
Do you want that as a part E as opposed to an adjustment of existing parts?
I'm just trying to get to
And
the
can
question.
could I just flag, I think it almost needs to be wider in terms of a governance decision
Yeah,
around
rather
any,
than it being,
any development where council is required to make a contribution. That money should be earmarked, put in a separate fund, so it can't be sort of touched as part of some kind of general development fund, so that we don't find ourselves on specific developments short. And I don't know how that would work or the best way for that to be done, but just a flag, I think that a bit of a funding strategy around that needs to be built into council's processes.
While we wait for the real money person over here, through you, Madam Mayor, I understand the outcome that you're trying to achieve there, and I would just point out for some context that, in my understanding, the council funding that was put into that account was a general rate. It wasn't specifically collected for Te Awa, and so the money or the cash that we might have to put in dedicated reserve funds for development is probably not going to meet the financial requirement of our council's contribution to that work. So by and large, a lot of that work, while it might have some funding in a reserve, would probably be loan funded to meet our obligation. Is that a fair statement?
And through the Mayor, I mean, we can also note that we will be coming back to council after a review around, whether or not there's a requirement to tag those funds. But I think that can come back to council as a future decision.
Yeah, and I feel comfortable with that, actually having that additional point in there, that yes, these were rates funded contributions to the financial development reserve. However, they were based on a set of structure plans that had detail behind them at the time, and again, just reiterating, that's where my discomfort lies when we're about to do a review of that structure plan. I will just hate to see us caught short by having those funds used rapidly for other things. So if we could actually just make the note that as we work through that review of the structure plan, we'll come back and relook at the suburban and urban reserve fund and look to action a transfer into a more tagged reserve fund at the time if required. Councillor Wright.
Does this change or amendment mean that you now support the motion?
Yes.
Determined by the end of the debate. That's not good.
That should be the...
Yes.
draft rather than the result.
Talk it over with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just get it right.
Yeah.
But all just introducing time. It's very sensitive.
So if you just get rid of the results, so there's a bit here, so no-
Subject to a review?
Yeah, no, no, it's not the review, it's basically the city other structure plan, so it's should we do the next page?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be to council, which one?
Thank you.
Yeah, for subsequent funding allocation.
Thank you. Are there any further questions around that before we? Do we have a mover of the item? Thank you, Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Brown. Did either of you wish to speak to that? No? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Moving through to, and we will take all of these individually actually, because there's a decision of council in here, and then we may wish to have a brief discussion on item 4. So item 2 was the Hawke's Bay Airport Limited half-year report to 31 December 2019. Do I have a mover?
Move.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Crown. Did you wish to speak to that? Can I? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 3 was a decision of council. Item 4 was the policy around council organisation appointments and remuneration, where we had asked for a review of some of the wording. The amended policy has come through as a separate attachment, and we have had the reference to someone having to have intellectual ability removed as a criteria for. So, and the other change was around a code of conduct or conflict of interest removal. Yes, if you wanted to just give an update.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as the Mayor has mentioned, and through you, Madam Chair, we understood, as I wasn't present at the committee, but the feedback was that there were 2 areas that needed to be updated and addressed. The first, obviously, was around the required skills and experience. So you'll see that in the updated policy that you've had access to, that we've actually removed the reference to a variety of turnover. So we've incorporated the skills and experience into one lot, but with the note that the higher the turnover or level of complexity of the council organisation that the appointee is involved with, the more emphasis should be placed on the level of experience and comfort with matters of complexity. So just sort of touching on it through that route. And the second was in relation to a quote which had some rather old-fashioned wording. So we have replaced that with the sentence that all directors are appointed by council and may be dismissed by council for breaches of this code. So removing the phrase "at the pleasure of," which is slightly unusual these days. So yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of Deborah? No? Do I have someone who'd like to move the paper?
Happy to move back to the original, like if they're happy with that, to then actually adopt it. You know,
Oh, because we laid it on the table.
It was laid on the
Just
table.
got that up.
So I've got the original.
Great, thank you. Yellow. So adopt the council organisation appointments and remuneration policy.
Yep, happy to move it now.
Councillor Taylor, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Brown. Councillor Simpson, you look like you're wanting to say something.
I do want to speak to the paper.
I'll just ask if Councillor Taylor would like to speak first.
No, well, I'll just speak on that. It was a little bit confusing at the time, and we thought that it was really just around the changing of the name. However, there were those comments or those wordings that were a little bit old and needed some clarification. And now that that's been done, I'm quite happy with the policy to be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, did you wish to? No?
No, just supporting the motion.
Okay. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I was absent through apology at the meeting that this was discussed, but I'd like to just discuss the matter around remuneration. We've set a high bar for the calibre of appointee to these roles, and I think that's definitely a very good thing. However, when we look at the remuneration, we're saying to a councillor, we'll appoint you to this board where you're going to have to cut the mustard with other professional directors, but we're not going to compensate you for that. And I think that's a misstep in this case. Because, let's put it this way, if I was approached, I'd be saying, no thanks, I'll go down the road and get $400 a day for another board. So I think we have to be mindful that if we are wanting councillors to be involved in this level of business, then we should be mindful that the CCO should be compensating them at market value to meet the skill sets that they bring to the table. So therefore I'm actually opposed to the recommendation around remuneration, and I believe that if a councillor does meet the criteria, then they should be entitled to the remuneration that is paid to other directors.
And I would say that the council-controlled organisations do come to us for a council decision around remuneration when they are actually making recommendations to have any changes there. So I have a level of comfort that that would be covered through that process.
Yep. Thank you.
If there's no further discussion or debate, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And that brings us to reports under delegated authority. And again, I will take the 3 items here as one, or just yell out if you'd like anything to be taken individually. But we have the tenders let, resource consents approved throughout this period, and documents executed under seal. Are there any questions of council officers on any of the items within these 3? No? Okay, do I have a mover of these items? Thank you, Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Wright. Neither of you wish to speak to it? No. I will therefore put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That brings us to the conclusion of our open agenda, and I'd ask for someone to move for us to go into public excluded. Councillor Crown, thank you. You're seconded by Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And we'll just have a brief break. Thank you very much. I like that.
So,
Brief break.